Good afternoon. Welcome to the Glendale Water and Power Commission meeting. Today is June 6, 2011. Can we have roll call?
Commissioner Adjournment?
Present.
Commissioner Armenian?
Present.
Commissioner Miller?
Present.
Commissioner Yao?
Present.
President Chan?
Present.
Item 2A, approval of the April 4th, 2011 meeting minutes.
I had one small change to introduce into a sentence that was a little bit convoluted, clarified the meaning of it. I don't have it right here. I think I gave you the paperwork on it, but unless you want to discuss it, I would just propose that we approve those minutes as amended. It doesn't really change the meaning. It clarifies it.
Do I have a motion to approve both the April and May minutes?
I'll second. Are you moved to approve both?
Well, I'll make a motion then to approve both minutes with the April one having the small changes that I stipulated. I think it was to break up one sentence into two sentences, remove one letter, change a pronoun, things like that.
Are they substantive?
Yeah, semantically, it clarifies the meaning. It doesn't really alter the meaning much. It's more of this is a grammatical type, rhetorical type change. If you have the paper there, we could read it. You want me to take it from you and I could read it? Thank you. This is, I think it's on the second to the last page. Under item 7, new business agenda forecast, the original sentence read, Commissioner Miller stated that Governor Jerry Brown declared that the drought is officially over, though Mr. Miller requested GWP staff to clarify whether GWP staff can come forth and explain whether GWP plans to lift mandatory conservation ordinance. I broke that into two sentences to read as follows. Commissioner Miller stated that Governor Jerry Brown declared that the drought is officially over. End of sentence. Next sentence. Mr. Miller requested GWP staff to clarify whether GWP can come forth and explain whether it plans to lift the mandatory conservation ordinance. So I would propose we accept both minutes with the April minutes amended as noted. Thank you.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Motion's passed. Next item, please.
Item 3A, reports information, smart grid update. Craig Keenan.
Madam President, Commissioners, my name is Craig Keenan. I'm the Business Transformation and Marketing Administrator. I'm here to give the smart grid update. This past week, we had 3 members of our staff attended the Itron Open Way Executive Forum. This is a forum that meets about every 6 months. The participating utilities are Detroit Edison, SCE, San Diego Gas and Electric, and CenterPoint. And basically, it's customers of the Open Way product, which we're installing, our smart meter product. In our MDMS, it's a forum to get together to exchange ideas and to see what others are experiencing during their installation, to work together in workshops, and that went over really well. The copies are topics that were covered: strategic developments, quality risk management, customer communication, things like that. And I attended one in February in Galveston. It was very helpful. Typically, I believe Southern California Edison hosted this one. Typically, they ask one of the participants to host it. I imagine we'll get asked to host the next one if we haven't been already. In terms of meter installations, we are about 74% complete, so we're moving right along. We should be done August, September timeframe with electric and water. Generally, things are going smoothly. So, we keep this on our website, too, this information for the public. In terms of our budget, as of May, and this didn't include all charges in May, the electric project is about $32 million, so we are still under budget. We're making up for when we had the delays in the October through December timeframe. In terms of water, the next slide. Water, we're around $11 million. We've pushed the completion date out to September because it's June now. We had projected June, but we had the 2-month delay. So we're on schedule. And a short update. Go to the next slide. We have I'd like to remind people we're on Twitter and Facebook. It's a good place to get up-to-date information on this project and what GWP is doing. And I'll entertain any questions.
Question, where are we in terms of DOE reimbursement of whatever funds they've promised us?
We just submitted an invoice today. I believe we are at around $11 million, but I can give you an update next time on exactly
Out of
where
this 32 million, 11 million?
There's a delay in getting
Right. But I mean, is about 11 million out of the
what that
out of the
we've
total?
received so far. I think
And that's just for the electric, right?
that's just electric. But I can give you a detailed account next time if that's
That'd be great.
Sure.
If we could make that part of the regular, just so
No
we're
problem.
tracking.
Is it premature at this point to state whether we've had any changes in policy or practice in the utility as a result of smart grid? If we have, I think it would be worthwhile sharing that with the Commission and the public watching.
As we move along, and the kind of forum that Craig just mentioned is invaluable to us to start to look at what, and it's more processes than policy at this point. And we are starting to change, upgrade policy, processes to align with what this project really is looking at in terms of customer application and our own application. So there's quite a few processes that are being changed. Not too many policies at this point. Once we're fully deployed, however, that will most likely lead to certain policies that will impact the customer, hopefully in a very positive way. So we are looking at that, but we haven't done that yet.
I think that's actually the better word to use, processes. Could you elaborate maybe on a couple of examples, just, or if you can?
I'm going to throw it back to Craig if you want to talk a little bit about what we're doing with the group.
Well, there'll be a number of processes that change. We have a meeting every Monday with the City ISD department to go over all the new computer systems that we're going to be putting in, our distribution management system, outage management system. We're also going to be putting in an enterprise service bus. I don't know if you remember a few months back when Glenn showed what the computer system's going to look like, or the architecture over the next few years. As those things get installed and up and operational, that's when we'll see the processes change. Yeah.
So the processes that are changing are really more part of the implementation phase and not post-implementation related to marketing or conservation or...
Well, we'll have
or-
a number of new programs for customers. The in-home display program. We'll have new marketing of ways to market to people and educate people on the use of electricity through the in-home displays and other things. We have our iSpare program, demand response program we're putting together for this summer.
And this question might be better directed to the general manager. I know we're reformulating the strategic plan. Do you think the reformulation of the strategic plan can take advantage of some of the information we're finding from the smart grid at this point, or is it premature?
No, that's not premature.
Yeah,
In fact,
okay.
you'll see when we present that to you that there's a whole new section dedicated to that.
Very good. Thank you. That's all I have.
I have a question about the customer's experience. You mentioned some potential pilots in the past meetings about maybe pilots in July for IHDs or even PCTs. How are those pilots coming along, or is there a plan to implement those pilots next month?
The in-home display pilot, we are working with the company right now to put together an agreement to start testing the project or the product in about 2 or 3 weeks. We should have an agreement, and then we'll be testing it in about 30 or 40 homes, and then we'll go to maybe 100 homes, and as we work out the issues, we'll start deploying.
Yeah, because I hear a lot of these different customer programs potentially coming online, but the 69% of the meters have been installed,
Right.
and I just haven't heard any things of how customers can take advantage of that.
Well, the first one they'll be able to take advantage of is the O-Power. Right now, we do the home energy reports, and they basically project based on every 2 month worth of information from a customer. We are working with Itron and O-Power to change that program to use the smart grid data and then provide the access to that data on the web, so somebody could go to the website, to their account, and see their usage up until the day before, and they could look at it in hourly increments or daily or weekly and look at their usage in that way. O-Power provides a whole host of things for the customer to do to save energy, educational tips, and so that's the first thing we're going to do, and that will be rolling out in a month or so too. The thing with the O-Power, they need 3 months of historical data to make it meaningful for the customer, so we're just still collecting that first few months of data. We understand that we're putting these meters out, and the customer needs to have some tangible evidence of what we're doing and how it's working and how it can help them, and we're really moving ahead to make that happen.
Right, the more we can explain and help the customer understand the usefulness of these electronic
Yes.
meters, the better, because right now they see a new meter, and that's pretty much what it is.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Keenan.
With 75% of the actual installations, what would you say are like the most common issues that the customers have been bringing up or complaining about?
We've had, as far as issues with the meters, the RF issue comes up once in a while. The privacy issue comes up once in a while. But typically, that's a very small part of our customer base that have had issues like that. Most of it, customers are just happy with it. There's no complaints. We've had I believe it's about 13 claims on different things, like one person, their gate got broken, or things like that.
Okay.
And so there's not been a lot of issues.
Okay, that's good to hear. Thanks.
Just regarding the RF radio frequency issue, I just wanted to note for those viewing at home that there was a very good editorial in yesterday's Los Angeles Times that puts those issues in context that's worth reading if customers have concerns about those specific issues.
But I'd also we have a section on our website that details a lot of that stuff too, but that editorial was really good.
I have one last question. That's a good point, Commissioner Armenian, about the RF issue, and I think that's a very minor issue compared to the opt-out potential. Can you elaborate on, have an update on the opt-out potential?
We've had, there was an article in the Glendale News Press a few weeks ago. Up until then, we had 12 customers who wanted to delay their installation of their meter. That article came out since then. Now we have about 26 people who have expressed that interest. But that's out of 85,000 meters we've installed, that's such a small number. And we do have the coffee in the park pretty much every few weeks, and anywhere from 20 to 50 people will show up. And I think that issue is brought up by 2 people in all the meetings we've had.
So are we going to be in compliance with giving the customer the option to opt out from installation of the electronic meters?
That's a policy decision.
That's essentially, we have made a decision to allow that for the moment, but we are going to bring that back to City Council within the next 2 months for a policy decision on that. Because PG&E, of course, is under CPUC jurisdiction, the Utility Commission. We are not. They will make a decision for the investor-owned utilities in the state. We are looking at what they're doing, but we're not jurisdictional. So ultimately it'll be a decision from the City Council.
Okay, so we're looking forward to maybe in 2 months to have a policy in place?
Yes.
And I will clarify that the CPUC decision on the opt-out is PG&E related only right now. and those hearings have not been held, so it's unclear where the CPUC is taking that. My advice would be to wait to see where that goes. And I think, like I said, it may not apply across all IOUs. We'll have to see.
Okay. No other questions, comments? Next item, please.
Item 3B, update water rate redesign. Bill Fox.
Excuse me, it appears there may have been a public speaker that wished to comment on this issue.
Oh, 3A, yes, okay. Mr. Milano, please.
Commission Chair Chan and members of the GWP Commission and staff, my name is Herbert Milano. In the last few months, I have been reviewing some of the documents concerning how the concept of the smart grid originated. And I want to report to you that I have lost a significant amount of confidence from the times that a few years ago when I was promoting smart meters, not necessarily a smart grid. In 2006, 2007, I was bringing up to the attention of the City Council how some cities in Canada have been able to provide a significant benefit to the low-income utility ratepayers through the use of a smart meter that they could have that connected to the main meter, and they're able to read what their actual usage is. They found a substantial, up to 20% reduction. I think it was an average of all those individuals who were having difficulty paying before and how they reduced their electricity. So I was very intrigued as to how it was that the city started the process. What triggered it? I found a particular document through the California Public Records Act that stated that the federal government had mandated, but it mandated a meeting to be considered. It did not mandate at all that cities or public utilities implemented. It simply mandated that it be considered. And I began to sort of assess how this decision started. Where did it germinate? What was the cause for it? How did it drive it? And I'm very troubled about that process and how this thing basically took momentum. Let me tell you why I am very concerned. Because at the end of the day, what I'm looking for, and what I was looking for, is an answer to the question, how will this benefit the customer? And to what extent is it going to benefit it? I don't think there's any other question that is as relevant as that. If it benefits the utility and it reduces cost to the utility and makes it more effective, then I would assume that that effectiveness will be translated into an additional benefit to the customer. How will it improve efficiencies? There is justification of how it will improve efficiencies. I don't think this is a black or white issue. We know that there will be. The question is to what extent. So during the budget study sessions, I started listening as to the increased amount of technical labor that would be required, over $1 million worth now from the IT department in order to sustain this thing on a year-to-year basis. So on the one hand, we're basically getting rid of maybe 12 employees in the future with regard to do the meter reading, and we're replacing it by a few employees and at a cost of over $1 million a year, significantly more than that. At the end of the day, I'm asking myself, how is it going to benefit the regular ratepayer? The homeowner, the apartment owner, the water utility customer. Well, for the water utility, there's a different problem because the water utility primarily is being paid for by the commercial, or should we say apartment owner, the landlord, not the resident. And it doesn't really provide us anything of significance to us, very little. And yet it is a preponderance of that particular usage. Now, I'm going to suggest that this commission reevaluate and get a new reevaluation of the financial justifications totally of this process. Even though it is well on its way to be completed, but I think it really needs to have a clarification of where we are. It would be the same thing in any private industry. You know, you decide to create a new plant, create a new warehouse, add a new division. At the end of the day, you need to have a firmly clear justification as to why it was created in the first place and what are the objectives that we expect at the end of the day. Are we expecting low-income users in electricity to reduce have the ability to reduce their electricity by 20%, let's say? I don't know. I don't think that was really clearly specified as a target objective. And that is really, at the end of the day, the goal of strategic plans, so that you be able to cascade, define what they are, and basically aim for that particular benefit. But what I'm finding is that, and the feeling that I get, is that the expenses are going to be fairly significant in the long haul, and the problems much more than we expected. It is my belief that small cities or medium-sized cities should not be in the cutting edge or the bleeding edge of technology. Let the bigger entities and the bigger organizations pay for that tryout. But I think as a matter of practice, for a city that is the 20 or 22nd largest in California, we could wait for somebody else to go and do the bleeding edge technology. And after it is tested fully, come back in and adopt things that are truly proven and tested. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Milano.
I'd like to point out the issue of justification for the expense has come up before in commission meetings, and I can't recall exactly what was said in those meetings, but I do remember that the conclusion was that there was a positive benefit-cost relationship to this, and that there had been other experiences using this elsewhere in North America, and perhaps it might be useful to have some clarification on your views on that.
The genesis for the smart grid occurred in 2007 here in Glendale, and was jointly supported by the City Council along with staff, actually being promoted by City Council to go ahead and take a look at looking at what the smart grid could do for Glendale. We provide an exhaustive report, which is available for our business case, for all the costs associated with it, and that was introduced in 2008 to the City Council and also to the Commission. Right. And from that point forward, in fact, what has occurred is the benefits have increased dramatically for a number of reasons, not the least of which is the $20 million that we did receive, stimulus funds. But because the technology is now allowing us to do more in 2011 than we had expected to do in 2008. So as we move ahead and we move forward, we're finding that this system is even far more beneficial than we initially expected, and it will provide far more benefits both to the customer, which is obviously what it's aimed at, and also to the utility. So there's efficiencies to be gained on both sides. And just as one example, Craig Keenan mentioned O-Power. O-Power, we've already seen in the limited pilot that we've done, honestly saves somewhere between 3% and 4%. And it's almost a passive type of operation where customers get to understand how they're using energy. As we integrate this in Smart Grid, that'll be done in real time. So customers will be able to save far more than that if they want to. But what we're seeing is just on something like that alone, and that's real. That'll occur as soon as we have the entire system operational later this year. We're seeing a good deal of benefit. The benefit to the utility itself, and Mr. Milano actually related to that, is substantial. That will have positive impacts on the customer as we move ahead, and it'll stabilize rates. There's no question that for the short term, there's a slight increase in costs as we ramp up to get the expertise in-house to operate this. This requires a different expertise than we have today. But over time, and time is probably the next 2 to 4 years, that will ramp down. The expertise will then be in-house, and we'll start to be able to attrit out positions that we no longer need because the skill sets from the old way of operating will no longer be required. So there'll be a small upfront increase in costs, and then it will go down. And that's the way we've shown it all along. I could go on, by the way. I mean, if we really want to have a debate, we can do that because we really understand this system extremely well. And whether or not it's agreed that we should be at the leading edge, we are at the leading edge, and we've learned a lot. We're doing it well. And I think, we're pretty proud of what we're doing, and we're not about to turn around right now. I don't think that would be prudent.
Is the exhaustive report in 2008, is that available online, or is it, I don't know what the size of it is.
Is it online? Okay, it's online. Yeah, it's okay. The business case provided by KEMA. It was a joint project between KEMA, which is our consultant, and our staff.
Okay. And you mentioned the 3 to 4% savings in power. How does that
O-Power.
and that's just one benefit.
That's just, that, I use that as just one very obvious benefit. There are numerous benefits, yes.
But how does that benefit compare to the cost? Can you comment on that, just to see if we have had a positive return on investment?
Well, the business case shows roughly about a 5-year, at the time, about a 5-year payback.
Okay.
And
All right.
this was in 2008. Okay, so that's prior to where we are today.
Okay. Yeah, it's going to take a little bit of time for this to clear out because we're still in the implementation phase. But there was exhaustive analysis, though. And
there continues to be, as you might imagine, getting funding from DOE. We are under their auspices, and they require us to report back to them on every step of the way. In fact, they'll be out here later this summer to audit us and take a look at what we're doing.
Thank you.
Okay. Next item, please.
Item 3B, update water rate redesign, Bill Fox.
Chairman Chan and members of the Commission, this afternoon we're going to do a brief update on the status of the water rate study. Our consulting firm of Wildan Financial Services will be doing a short presentation. And after the presentation's done, we're going to need to probably coordinate some schedules with you and City Council. We anticipate after this session today that we want to have a joint study session with the Commission as well as City Council, because we're getting to the point where we're ready to hatch the program onto the general public at large, and we want to be able to share that and get additional input. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Habib Isaac and Pierce Rosen.
Bill. Good afternoon, President, Commissioner Chan, as well as other commissioners of GWP. Myself, Habib Isaac, and Pierce Rossum with Wildan Financial Consulting, and we're going to give you a brief update on where we were from last time when we presented to you, what we're currently actively working on, as well as what are the next steps from this point. In regards to our last commission meeting, we identified a few items that were part of our next steps for our analysis, and we have that listed here. The primary thing that we're working on was all the consumption analysis. We have around 1 million line items of data that we had to analyze over 6 years of consumption. And we've gone through that process. We've done the data analysis. We also incorporated a net plan investment, which is capital improvements for the next 5 years, into our model. And in regards to rate design, we analyzed the characteristics of particular customers within your service area. We discussed tier structures that could be implemented with GWP staff, and also the conservation objectives of the agency, not only in regards to statewide, but also in regards to your specific policies and your conservation ordinance. Currently, we're getting to the point of setting unique rates for our customer classes. In particular, we are focused on multifamily units, and with that, we have a couple items that we have to filter down to or drill down to make sure that we account for multifamily accordingly. This is a breakout of all your different billing categories that you use for customer service. It also shows on the right-hand side the peaking factors of each of the customers. So you can see they definitely differentiate, which could warrant the need to have different customer classes by each of these billing categories. Go ahead. But in particular, I just want to focus on those billing categories that are associated with multifamily. In particular, we have 5 different categories. All these are jointly looked at as multifamily. And what we need to do is identify what are the unique characteristics of multifamily. One thing that we have to know why it may be important to identify them separately is the fact that they are definitely different single family, in where a majority of their water consumption is going to be indoor use, as opposed to having a huge backyard. and also the differential between population densities. We would analyze what is the density of a single-family home versus a multifamily home to then distinguish what is the actual needs of multifamily units in comparison to single-family residential. Some of the unique characteristics among those multifamily billing categories are what are the total number of units being served by a particular account? Is the meter serving only the units, or is the meter serving the units as well as the common area of the complex? And then also, is there a meter within any of those categories that is only serving the common area? So these are the items that we're investigating right now, that we have to make sure we do the due diligence so we don't misclassify a particular account into the wrong category. Go ahead. Now, in regards to rate design, Pierce Rawson is going to describe how the unique characteristics of multifamily transitions into how we incorporate it into the rate design of our model.
Good afternoon. As Habib mentioned, we've identified why we need a multifamily class and the distinction between multifamily, single-family, and commercial units. These are the items that we're going to address in terms of designing a proper rate structure for multifamily units. Right now, the main thing is Glendale, as opposed to other communities that we've dealt with, have a very large multifamily population, whereas it's typically about a 10% of the customer base. Here, it's nearly half, and the consumption is about 41% of total consumption. As Habib mentioned, multifamily has a very different usage pattern compared to single family. Also, some of the rate factors, we're going to look at what's fair and equitable. That's the main driver behind a cost of service analysis, and that's why we're going to try to break it up as much as we can. Between those 5 different billing categories, can we condense a few of those? And what's the justification for condensing those? And most importantly, getting those unit counts. Is it 10 units for a multifamily account, or is it 100 units being served by that one account? And that's going to help us determine certain allocations of water to each of those actual accounts. So in order to do that, this is the analysis that's needed. We're going to be looking at comparing the multifamily data that's available through the billing database and going against our parcel database that we have in-house. Unit counts are not actively maintained. It's not necessary under the current billing structure, so we're going to have to rebuild that in terms of designing that for the new rate structure. We work with this data day in and day out in terms of our other business lines, so we're going to be taking a look at the unit counts that are available through the parcel database and try to cross-tab them in order to determine how many units are actually being served by that account. In the end, the result will be a more fair and equitable rate structure for multifamily. As Mr. Fox mentioned, June 28th is our target for a joint meeting between the Commission and the Council in terms of preliminary rate design questions. We have a meeting scheduled for this Thursday, if not this Thursday, early next week, to discuss further rate design options and kind of finalize those revenue requirement numbers and the rate design. On our side in-house, what we're going to be doing is finalizing the consumption analysis, the multifamily analysis, and confirming with the billing department that they can in fact implement the proposed rates. With that, we'll be happy to answer any questions.
I have a question. With multifamilies, primarily, we still have master meter. Is that correct? Okay, so with this design, you're designing around that knowledge that is master metered?
Yes, that's correct. There is some slight different configurations for master meter where it's master metered and it serves only units. Master meter serves units in the common area. But essentially, we're going to be seeing if, when we get to the end of this, the billing software is able to use unit counts as a factor to incorporate into the billing system. So as Pierce mentioned, a 100-unit complex is going to have a different allocation compared to a 10-unit complex and not treated the same in what their needs are in regards to the service levels. Essentially, what we're doing with multifamily is basically a budget-based type of water rate for them. So then it's equitable between themselves as well as residential. And for those multifamily complexes that are also have a common area that they're irrigating, then that common area should get charged the rate that a single-family home would get charged for their outdoor use. So then it's back to being equitable between customer classes as well that are considered both residential.
Okay, thanks.
A follow-up question to that. So how will you account for different size units in a multifamily? Because there are buildings that have a 2,400 square foot unit versus a 600 square foot unit.
Good question. Currently, right now, we're just looking at the density factors that are typically generated by that particular type of dwelling. We're not drilling down to the point of what is the square footage, but more what's the density that's generated by a single-family home compared to multifamily home, so we keep those relationship proportional. And we'll use the census data as well as the Department of Finance updated numbers in regards to the number of vacancies within the city to look at what is the true density factor of today for GWP.
A few other questions. How are we on the schedule of the project? Although maybe that's better to ask Mr. Fox or Mr. Steiger in terms of the completion of the work.
As we indicated on the slide, we anticipate having a joint meeting with City Council on the 28th.
Okay.
If we were to go back to our original schedule as we had anticipated, we're probably about a month behind. And the real reason for that is the complexity that we've run into in dealing with the multifamily issue was far more complicated than we all anticipated, taking a look at the different nuances and how the account should be handled. And we think going through this additional analysis, we're going to end up with a much better equitable solution than we would before. So sometimes it takes a little bit longer to get to the bottom line, the right answer, but in this case, going this direction will give us a better result.
There was a training component to this as well, right? As your system is being revised, there will be training for the staff.
There will be training for the staff, as well as there's going to be some additional knowledge that's necessary for the public, too. Because we are going through and proposing something a little bit different than before. We treated all single-family residents and multifamily residents the same, and now we're trying to make it more equitable with the understanding that multifamily doesn't have the outdoor irrigation on as opposed to a single-family residence. So we're trying to square it up so that when we do our allocations, it's done in a fair and equitable manner.
The system is flexible, as I understand, so that if you wish to alter customer classes in the future, you can do that.
The system will allow us to do a number of different scenarios when it's completed. That's the beauty of it.
Okay.
First off, when we get to what we believe is the result that we want to share, there may be some additional input that will cause us to make revisions. When we do make these revisions, it won't be something that takes a lot of time because of the flexibility that was designed by Wildan.
You anticipate it's going to dramatically improve communication with council and other stakeholders on your budget, I would assume?
My hope is that it does.
All right. Thank you.
Well, thank you for a great presentation update. But I was wondering if you can elaborate on the actual proposed rates, because our joint meeting, presumably with the City Council, I think everyone wants to know how the rates would look like, who pays for what, and if you're going to give some examples of what different customer classes will be paying, that would be very helpful. Do you have some idea on how it would look?
Sure. Conceptually, from a macro level, what we anticipate is for the residential single-family to be on a tiered rate structure where the lower tiers is for what are their needs in relation to their indoor use, and then the higher tiers for what they need for outdoor use. As one thing that we mentioned was part of other service lines that we do for cities, we do administration where we have to use parcel data from the secured wall. So we're rolling that up into our analysis for the water rate study, where we're looking at what is the average square footage of homes within GWP service area, as well as what is the average lot size of homes within GWP, and we're using that information to determine what is the typical amount of irrigable square footage that a single-family home needs on average for the outdoor use. So those are going to be the drivers of the parameters to determine what is going to be the appropriate amount of gallons per capita per day that a particular residential property needs. With multifamily, we're removing the need for outdoor use, except for those particular accounts that also serves the common areas. So there really is going to be allocation just for their indoor needs. And then for commercial, we haven't drilled down yet, but right now we're just doing a uniform rates for commercial because there's such a broad range of uses with when you go to non-residential, that some non-residential properties or uses cannot change their habits based on the function that they're serving in regards to what product they're producing, things of that sort. That it doesn't give a fair relationship of whether or not they're conserving in relation to other types of uses in that particular category. But in regards to the actual rate itself, that's what we're going to be discussing with GWP staff later on this week to early next week, and then what we expect to present at a target date of June 28th.
So during your presentation on June 28th, can you lay out all those different examples? Because I think it will be very helpful for the public and for the council and us to see how it pertains to each individual person. If we own a single-family home, about a certain lot size that you described, then we pay this much. And if you own a commercial building of 10 units, you pay this much, and blah, blah, blah.
Sure. In relation to the presentation of our particular rates, what we're going to have is showing what is the allocation for these tiers, as well as we're going to have a chart with a comparison of what the existing customer was paying today and what they are going to be paying with the proposed rates, and what's the differential if there is one. And then you're going to be able to drill down and pick any type of customer class, and then it's going to have that comparison in a chart form of what they were paying and what they're going to pay. The nice thing that we're doing with our model is that you're going to be able to make changes on the fly. If there's a recommendation of, I want us to keep if there's a revenue requirement increase of, say, 12% that's warranted just based on the numbers, you might have a policy decision of, but for this particular year, because of the economy, we don't want it to be more than 7%. We could easily change that on the fly, and it will show you what the results would be in seconds. And we've already shown some of that process of the modeling with GWP staff. And one thing I also want to point out is that through this whole process, we already had a few meetings with them with staff to look at the model development. So we're taking this an approach where we're not in a vacuum, and then at the end of the day, when we're done with our analysis, this is the first time that staff's going to see our model. They're already getting familiar with the model, so then at the end of the day, they're not going to need a full-blown training on it. It's going to be really just understanding the drivers that make the model work. So I believe the presentation is going to give you that visual and that conceptual view of what the rates are and how does this compare to our existing rate structure of today.
Yeah, that'll be great. Thank you.
Will you also have the ability to demonstrate some proposed or anecdotally at least some examples of conservation programs that we could implement that would incentivize conservation? Because that's kind of where we started from. We wanted to make sure that there was those who were conserving were being financially rewarded for their behavior. Will we be able to show some of that, examples of what sort of kind of typical programs could be implemented, even if they're not the exact proposed programs?
Yes, I'm going to have Pierce talk about this a little bit more, but one thing we're doing is looking at your current ordinance to see, based on the different phase that you're in, how does that affect the usage of residents and what type of reduction would you see? We're also going to look at conceptually again that those in the lower tiers, because they're just really using what's necessary, that those are going to stay fixed, and really those that are using the outdoor water, even though when it does conserve, the differential is going to increase. But with that, I'm going to turn to Piers too, because he's been focusing on this primarily as part of our project and the tasks that we're working on.
So there are two options that we can have, and two approaches that we take. One in terms of the revenue requirements and setting that if GWP identifies certain programs that they would like to administer, we have basically a yes or no option. So do you want to implement it? Yes, no. And then on the fly you can see the impact on both conservation and in terms of revenue requirements if you do program A, B, or C. Additionally, moving to a higher tiered rate structure rather than the two-tier structure right now, we have set up a 5-tier preliminary rate structure for single family. And the main purpose of that is for conservation. And so once you can identify that, then price elasticity kicks in. And you really try to encourage conservation through price signaling. And that's, through all the research that's been done, all the studies that have been analyzed, price signaling is pretty much the best approach because it's the easiest to identify what's the cause and effect. When you implement certain programs, you don't know exactly what the net result. And so from a financial stability point of view, price signaling is one of the stronger approaches to take.
And do you guys have any examples of case studies from other cities where they've actually implemented some of these things so that there might be some learnings we could achieve before experimenting?
Yes, a lot of it depends on the city. Every city is different, every city is unique, especially here with the multifamily and single-family mix. So we can definitely show some of baseline figures based on previous results, but it really depends on anything from the weather to the economy to just a lot of different factors.
So it sounds like you guys will be linking the conservation ordinance to the model itself and maybe show some examples of how an average family and single-family home using the same amount of water from last year versus this year, and then potentially if that same family saved 10%, then there will be like a price reduction as well. Am I correct in assuming that's the model that would incorporate all that?
Yes. So as Habib mentioned, what we show is when we show the sample bills for the certain customer classes, we show generally a efficient user, a normal user, and a wasteful user. And you can see, the efficient user might see a 5% reduction in their total bill. The moderate might stay the same, and the wasteful user will see a large increase. And because that goes, again, with the conservation strategy. And a lot of that's the kind of give and take and the strategy and the discussion that will take place with GWP next week and on the board meeting on the 28th. And so how do you want that pricing to impact the end users?
So if your model incorporates, let's say, all the phase conservation efforts, I think we're phase 2 and back to phase 1, but over time, if we actually go to phase 3, 4, 5, would that incorporate all that conservation effort?
And that's one of the things that we're building. We have macros that are run, and you can save certain scenarios. So when you hit, what if we go into phase 3? What's that do to the rates? What's that do to the revenue requirements? Because one of the big things that we want to make sure, and the reason we encourage all these different variables, is if certain conservation takes place, you want to make sure that you're still financially solvent. And so if you go into phase 3 drought, then that's going to have different impacts on your revenue requirements than if you go back to phase 1.
Would your model be fixed where if you go to subsequent phases of the conservation ordinance that the revenue requirement will still be the same but increases on the higher tiers? Is that what your model will be showing, so that we wouldn't have to, GDP staff wouldn't have to ask us or the council for additional rate increase because you would incorporate that into the higher tier structure? Is that what you're doing?
Essentially, yeah. Okay. And those are different pricing scenarios that we're building into the model.
Okay, so that's good to hear, because that's something we want to avoid is additional increases in rates, whereas you can maybe penalize those who are not conserving.
Yeah, essentially, we want the water rate model to complement your current ordinance or any changes in your ordinance. And in regards to the cost, the revenue requirements, one thing that I would imagine if conservation occurs, that there would be a savings in the amount of water you need to purchase from MWD or Metro Water District. So there would be some savings in regards to certain line items within your revenue requirements.
Yeah, it'd be helpful to explain to council all those steps that you're taking and all the explanation that you just did. That's very helpful.
And perhaps this is a question for Mr. Steiger or Mr. Kavunis. Will this also incorporate a lot of the deferred capital needs in terms of working that into our pricing so that we can catch up on appropriate infrastructure upgrades?
That's our plan, to get to a point where we are in a pay-go situation, which is essentially what you're explaining, yes.
Okay. No other comments? We have a public speaker. Mr. Milano, please.
Thank you, Commissioner Chair Chan and members of the GWP Commission. My name is Herbert Molano. I truly welcome the effort in getting a study done on the multifamily building sector of the city. Some of you may be aware that a few years ago, about 8 years ago, I was president of the Glendale Apartment Owners Association. And in the process of both founding and establishing the organization, we started collecting a significant amount of data. We needed to know basically what were the demographics, the size of the industry within Glendale. But of course, in Glendale, you have a larger set than the set that the GWP services, because we have those areas in the far north Glendale that are not serviced, I believe, by GWP. At the time, we counted very close to 5,500 buildings, and divided by the number of units, we basically have about 8, on an average, 8 units per building. Those are just rule of thumb figures that you could use. And I think that gives you a sort of like a base as to how to begin analyzing and looking at the data. Now, the city, the GWP also has the electrical utility, which allows them to have the data as to how many units there are per building. So you take the electrical utility data, combine it with it will allow you to know how many units you have overall. And from there, you could pretty much calculate what the average usage is. It is my contention that you're going to find, since most builders want to maximize the amount of rentable footprint to the overall parcel size, you're going to find that most buildings are going to have a very small setback and very small landscaping and irrigation, vis-a-vis the regular, all the other uses for regard to the units, and that these buildings are all master metered. The larger units generally are going to have 2 meters because you have the additional cost burden of the sewer cost, and it's pretty significant. In fact, it's probably one of the most significant parts of the bill that we have. So those builders who build buildings in the 50, 100 unit range will probably have dual meters, one for irrigation and one for the rest of the building. Now, so that should allow you to at least put your arms around how these apartment buildings work with regard to the usage. But I have an experience here that was quite difficult for me to tackle this past couple of months. We had the smart meter installed at our building, and my water usage shot up 50%. So my first inclination was that maybe the old meter was going a little slower, and now I basically have the realities. I really got concerned. Since then, I found out that there's been a couple of errors that occurred in the transfer process. But what is really significant to me is the effort that I took to measure this usage every single day and review everything with these tenants. It was not an easy thing to do. Quite difficult to make them accountable, really go back to processes that allow them to conserve. I'll tell you that the average usage for my tenants right now for a 1,000 square foot apartment is 190 gallons per day. And my personal usage at a single-family home in Los Angeles is 80 gallons per day, and I'm a conservationist, and that includes irrigation. So I think that we have some very significant areas of improvement. The question is, how do we accomplish it? I can only see one way right now, and that is for me to install sub-metering to make it effective and make tenants accountable to that and eventually bill them for it. But I think that what we need to really rethink, and for this commission, is to think about this concept of this being revenue neutral, and that we need to establish a minimum per usage base. My suggestion is 50 gallons per person per day as your very bottom line with regard to the basic usage at the lowest rate. I know that this is not as thorough as an analysis that you would get from Wilden, but I think it gives you a way of framing what you need to address. Because the last thing we want is to be able to conserve significantly and then find our bills are not changing at all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next item.
Item 3C, water conservation in Glendale. Peter Kavunas.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. Peter Kavunas, Assistant General Manager for Water at GWP. I wanted to give you an update on where we are with conservation in the City of Glendale. As you know, the Metropolitan Water District repealed the water supply allocation plan in April. And looking at our Glendale Municipal Code that prescribes various stages of conservation for Glendale, looking at specific language in the code that calls for minimizing hardship to the residents of Glendale, and also looking at the overall picture of the reasons for the shortage that we had, we recommended to City Council on May 24th that we go off of the mandatory conservation stage 2, which prescribed which days of the week residents could irrigate and mandated that people could irrigate only on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. Now, we did that fully believing that people have learned from the last 2 years that watering 3 days a week is adequate to maintain lawns green. We didn't see lawns dying. We didn't get phone calls from people saying that that's not enough. None of that actually did happen. So we feel that people will continue to irrigate 3 days a week. It'll just be a little more voluntary, a little more flexible. It'll get us out of the enforcement role that we don't particularly like to be in either. We're a water supplier, not necessarily water police. So the recommendation was made to Council and was adopted by Council. And at this point, where the City of Glendale is, we're in what's called Phase 1, which is essentially voluntary conservation. There's a whole host of no waterways provisions that are in effect. And we're looking forward to the conservation efforts and the gains that have been made in the last couple of years to continue. We plan to supplement that with an outreach effort that would change the message that we've had over the last couple of years, which was a message of you can only irrigate these prescribed days of the week, to a message that says 3 days a week is enough. Please keep to that as much as possible.
Okay. Thank you for that update. I think it's very helpful, very informative, and I agree we can take off the conservation stage 2. However, we all should remember that it's a precious commodity and should save, and yes, we all should continue to volunteer to conserve.
So what happens if your data starts to show increase in usage? Do you have any plans in place?
Well, we have the ability to look at customers' usage. We have the ability to reach out to them and see if a particular customer is experiencing an abnormal increase in use, which we can help them understand where that is. Actually, I just spoke with a customer today, mentioned to them they had a leak on their property, and it's a very gratifying feeling to be able to help them. If we see an overall increase, I think our response is, to the extent that we're funded, we can ramp up the outreach to customers, again reinforcing the message. We found a strong correlation between the outreach intensity and the effect of conservation.
I'd be interested in taking a look at this periodically, just from that perspective, to see whether or not a different recommendation should be needed if we see dramatic rises that start to outstrip. I know the MWD has changed its position, but that doesn't mean we can't be more conservative in our approach.
Thank you, Mr. Kavunas. Are you aware of other cities are following suit in ratcheting back their conservation efforts?
Yes, just about every city in Southern California. I know Pasadena adopted it in April. Burbank hasn't made a decision yet. I think it hasn't gone to their city council at this point. But just about every city in Southern California has taken the same position. There were actually a few that were reluctant to go into mandatory conservation in the first place, which is hard to believe as challenging the water supply situation was. And of course, needless to say, these were the first adopters of no mandatory conservation as soon as they had a chance. In general, water suppliers take it to heart that the business is to provide water for people to use, not to take it back and mandate what we view as hardship. So I would say, by and large, Southern California has gone off of mandatory, and we're but one city following suit.
So are we still also out of the potential penalty from MWD if we overuse our allocation? Is that also out?
Correct. When the water supply allocation policy was repealed back to what they call stage 0, out went the penalties and any implications of overusing water.
Okay, so the risk for maybe having fewer people conserve wouldn't be as great if we actually see a spike potentially if people think that, oh, we're out of the drought, but then we wouldn't be penalized for additional water supply.
That's correct.
Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Next item, please.
Item 4, oral communications.
We have one card here. Mr. Milano, please.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, GWP President Chen and members of the GWP Commission and staff. My name is Herbert Molano. For many years, I've taken an interest on some of the long-term trends that I found within the city of Glendale and its management, stemming from the city council and city manager and its management of the water utility. My concerns go back quite a few years as I started to look at various different trends. The trends that concerned me were as follows. A significant lack of adequate infrastructure investment, meaning from its electrical power plants to the main water mains, to valves, reservoirs, and so on. It's been also my concern that during quite a few years, the transfers of the financial reserves of the GWP to the general fund have been excessive to the point of being detrimental to the core operations of the GWP. And I've stated it many times. And so I decided to collect some data that might be relevant as to what is driving this process. And the data that is here comparing the year 2000 to 2010 shows that transfers from the Glendale Water and Power in the year 2000 was nearly $14 million, and in fiscal year 2010, it was $23 million. During the same period of time, the water utility has responsibly reported to you and to previous commission that there has been a significant need for infrastructure investment. The last report, I cannot recall the name, but I remember looking at it about 4 months ago, was the report given in the fall of 2007 that highlighted over $200 million just for the water utility in terms of the needed basic infrastructure. So during the budget study sessions, I've been paying careful attention and to this renewed concern, because in January of 2007, I believe Mr. Cavunas made a presentation that to the City Council that the financial resource for the water utility were basically dwindling down to almost nothing. It was down to about $3 million at the time. And therefore, because of that need, they requested a bond issue, or the council suggested a bond issue for both water utility and the electrical utility, $110 million. My inclination at the time was that the bond issue was made primarily for the purposes of the basic infrastructure. Water lines, valves, pumps, reservoirs, and so on. And to my astonishment, the money went into smart meters. I mean, at least that's my inclination, and that I believe, if I heard correctly, that there may be another bond issue yet again. And so I think it behooves for us to really take a look carefully as to what is taking place in terms of justifying these transfers, especially now as the city has a tremendous need to try to figure out how to support its increasing payroll and benefit obligation. And it is doing it through the Wilden report that I think is incredibly insufficient and does not address the parts of the expenses that are being held by the GWP in favor of the city. I mentioned before the electrical, the lights, and the traffic signals, and the city street lights that are being borne by the city as well, including by the GWP, including the proper cost of the building where the GWP resides right now, including the cost of maintaining the fire hydrants. So as I look at this report, it's being, in my opinion, incredibly one-sided in trying to figure out how the city general fund loads the utility with all of these costs, instead of in doing the due diligence and looking at the reverse of how long the GWP has been carrying the electricity costs and other costs that properly belong in proper accounting, that belong in the general fund. Consequently, it is my opinion that the CAFR is erroneous in many respects. It is untruthful in that regard, and that this commission should lead the way to make sure that the Wilden report properly accounts for the burden that the GWP is carrying in favor of the general fund. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Milano. Next item.
Item 5A, public hearing, urban water management plan. Peter Kavunas.
I understand. So we're opening this up as a hearing, and so we're giving the floor to the GWP staff to present the urban water management plan, and I will take then afterwards any comments from the public. If anyone would like to be heard regarding this matter, please submit a public speaker card. I have one already right now. Okay, so Mr. Kavunas.
Madam Chair, members of the Commission, I'm Peter Kavunas, Assistant General Manager of Glendale Water and Power for Water. It's my pleasure to give to you a presentation today that is part of the required by law public hearing on adopting an urban water management plan. So, with your permission, I will proceed with the presentation. Next slide, please, George. The act that requires us to prepare a plan requires actually every supplier in the state of California that serves more than 3,000 customers or more than 3,000 acre-feet of water in any given year to prepare a plan showing where its supplies are coming from. The essence of the Urban Water Management Plan, amidst all the legalese that are included in the Act, is fundamentally two questions for every water supplier. The fundamental question is, for every supplier, is, do you have enough supplies that you project in the future to meet the demands that you project in the future, reasonable demands? And there's sources of data that suppliers can use to project their future demands, and suppliers are expected to have a frank discussion of their supplies and any threats to their future supplies of water. The second question that the Urban Water Management Planning Act asks is, what are you doing specifically about conservation? And up until this time around, it was specifically about the best management practices. I'll give you a little more information about that in a minute. And something that was added as a result of a recent law is what are water suppliers doing specifically to comply with a piece of legislation called 20 by 2020, meaning 20% conservation by the year 2020. Water suppliers are supposed to adopt these urban water management plans every 5 years, in years that end in 0 and 5. We're now, of course, in a year that ends in a 1, but that's a special case. It's the whole state was given a 6-month extension to file and adopt and file these urban water management plans for the year ending 2010 by June 30th of 2011. So here we are today. In a nutshell, for us in Glendale, and these are numbers that you hear updates on a monthly basis, so they shouldn't really come as a surprise. You see the two sources, the two parts of the picture for us. One is a supply, one is a demand. Our demand for the fiscal year 2010 was 26,448 acre-feet. And we met that by producing a total of 28,000 acre-feet. The difference is unaccounted for water, is water that we produce, put in the system, and it actually doesn't get metered. That's a fairly small percentage. The nationwide standard for unaccounted for water is 10%. In California is lower, and in Glendale we're below 5%, and our goal is to remain below 5%. For a system like ours, which has about 380 miles of pipe and is fairly well aged, it's actually a pretty good metric. We're proud of being below 5%, and we actually aim to go lower than that. But with that explanation, for fiscal year 2010, we met our supplies with sources that you're familiar with: groundwater from the San Fernando Basin and Verdugo Basin, MWD imports, and recycled water. This table here is a table that's out of the Urban Water Management Plan itself, and it goes to answering the question, what is your probable water demand? And so there is a projection that's made in the Urban Water Management Plan based on past statistics about growth in the population and also about about the per capita demand. Those are applied to the future, and we are projecting for the year 2015 the demand that we had in 2010 would increase from 26,448 to 28,866 acre-feet. The year 2020, 28,946 acre-feet, and so on, increasing in 5-year increments. And the projection is made according to the Urban Water Management Planning Act. Similarly, the plan shows where the supplies are going to come from. Our sources are pretty much the sources that we use today, and the plan shows them being projected as the San Fernando Basin is fairly well maxed out in terms of the ability to produce. We have a solution there that produces groundwater and treats it through a treatment plant. We have fairly finite capacity, and that's what we project. So you see the years 2015, 2020, our production from the San Fernando Basin is remaining at 7,800. Verdugo Basin, as you know, we are currently not producing our full entitlement, but we're in the process of drilling new wells and increasing what we produce. And so we're projecting by the year 2015, our ability will have increased from a previous max of about 2,700 acre-feet a couple of years ago to the full allotment of 3,856 acre-feet per year. Recycled water, at this point in time, we're projecting that we are going to stay at the existing supplies that we make on recycled water today. The highest we've sold is just over 1,600 acre-feet. We think it will stay that way.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Of course.
On the recycle, so what's the driver there? Why do you think it will maintain there? Is it just because of sources of recycled or the infrastructure issue?
It's an infrastructure issue. You're right. To increase the demand, would have to put in more pipe, more pump stations, possibly more storage in the ground to reach out more customers. At this point in time, that's not in our plan financially. We can't afford it. If that changes over time, we would make the investment. But at this point in time, it's more expensive than our other sources of water, and so given the existing financial constraints, it's being put off for the future.
You're just kind of estimating that for the next 30 years we're not going to make any sort of investments in that regard?
It's the best we know, and as a supplier, for this plan, we need to just lay the cards out as we know them today. It's very possible that 10 years from now, as a city, we may come to the conclusion that, we can go the extra 900 acre-feet of demand that we have unmet right now. But at this point in time, as we're preparing this plan, we don't see it.
Thank you.
Ultimately, I'm sorry.
I have a question, Mr. Kavunas. Regarding the recycled water, there were discussion about maybe leveraging opportunities where someone's digging the floor, the ground up already. We might as well lay those recycled water pipes. So could potentially that happen where in the future we could lay recycled groundwater pipes for possible future customers so that your increase in recycled water usage would go up?
We are considering any and every option to increase recycled water. It's just at this time when we're preparing this plan today, we have nothing tangible that we can claim on this document of how we would meet future supplies. And we need to be as truthful in this document and as realistic in this document as we know things to exist today. There are many, you could come up with many scenarios. For example, we could come up with a very high-level purification process that recycles each and every drop of water that comes through the treatment plant. Could that be done? Sure. Could that happen in the 20-year horizon of this plan? Sure. Do we think today that that's going to happen? No, and so it's not in the plan. And so any source that we have any doubt about, we don't include it in the plan.
But I thought in previous capital improvement plans there was a top 5 list of recycled water projects that potentially could be funded, and with the new ordinance, the utility would provide those investments. So couldn't you capture those type of investments in your future forecasts of recycled water usage?
We could, but our 5-year capital improvement program does not include any money for recycled water expansion.
What about those high priority projects that potentially we could use recycled water? Is that captured anywhere?
Those are still there as potential demand, but it's a matter of having the funds available, and we do not have the funds available in the next 5 years.
Okay, so we're pretty much scratching all those recycled water projects off the list in the 5-year period.
We put them off for at least 5 years. Yeah.
5 years. Okay.
Regrettably, but that's a reality that we have to.
Okay, so anyone who potentially come up and request recycled water expansion pipes, we would just have to say no, that we can't really do it.
We have no funds to pay for that. If the way the municipal code reads today is that we have the ability to pay for recycled water projects, it doesn't preclude us from having somebody who's interested in recycled water, having them pay for it if they're really interested in paying for it. But recycled water doesn't pay off quickly enough. We've looked at it many times for many different developments. The return on investment is a very long period of time, and the only way it could happen really is if the city funded it, because the city would continue to reap the benefits over a long period of time, and the city presents the benefit of aggregating everybody's interest. So it has theoretically could have the funds to do that, but economically speaking, we don't have the capital for it.
Okay, yeah, I just want to close the loop on those potential projects and any forecasting that we see. So thank you for the update.
I had one more question. I'm sorry, because it's on my mind. On the previous slide about probable water demand, I assume you're using some sort of formula here in terms of projecting that, but does that factor in the rate redesign, conservation factors that can affect demand, as well as the smart water meter, which would give us more robust data with which to implement conservation?
Yes, it does, and you will see that in 2 slides from now.
Thank you.
One more slide back, George. Thank you. Ultimately, the water that we cannot produce locally is water that we have to purchase from Metropolitan Water District. And every Metropolitan Water District member agency is different in its signature, if you will. Our characteristic is that we meet about 40%, 40% of our demands from local sources, and we buy everything else from Met. If our local sources were somehow to be impacted, which we do not anticipate, we would purchase more water from MWD. If for some reason there was tremendous growth in Glendale, which again we do not anticipate, but if there were growth in Glendale, we would purchase additional water from MWD. So that is our answer as a utility, as a city, is how would we meet increase in future demands? It would be from Metropolitan Water District. We have the ability to do that. It's a pricing mechanism, and we've never had trouble with Metropolitan Water District. Even back in the late 90s, when the city did not have the San Fernando Basin available because of pollution, At that time, we were taking a lot more water from MWD, and it was not a problem then, nor do we expect it to be a problem in the future. Next slide, please. I wanted to show you just a couple of comparisons. The top table brings the two previous tables together, and it shows you our projected supplies, what we believe are available supplies, and it compares them side by side with what we believe are reasonable demands for the future, for every 5-year increment going out to the year 2035. And because of our access to Metropolitan Water District water, we forecast that we would have no problem meeting the demand, even though they increase slightly over a 20-year, 25-year period. The table below was something that we added to show you what the 2005 Urban Water Management Plan said the future would look like. And we thought you might find it interesting comparing it with what we actually experienced. And so in 2005, we projected annually that the demands would be, for 05-06, would be 33,653 acre-feet. This is including recycled and including unaccounted for water. That would be the total demand. And our actual total demand was 31,000. You can see going down row by row, 33,993 acre-feet compared with 32,846, and so on, reflecting that reality is always different than projected plans, and also that the plans are sort of by the formula that they're created somewhat conservative. Now, in these last 5 years, we've also had the significant, really a 3-year drought, and you can see that our demand dropping for 3 years in a row from where it was, and that's just the nature of water supply. But I thought you might find it interesting to see what we projected versus what we actually met in terms of demand. Now, the second question the plan asks is, how are you doing with respect to conservation, and specifically the law of 20% conservation by the year 2020. Glendale has already met that target. We're in full compliance. The Act gives 4 possible methods to calculate a possible way of compliance, and we used what's called Method 3. Method 3 relies on a hydrologic region. We're in hydrologic region 9, I believe. The average for a region that's acceptable is 149 gallons per person per day, and we would have to meet 90% of that. We would have to be, I believe, at 137 gallons per person per day. This chart is also part of the plan, and it shows the gold-colored line shows the 2020 goal of 137 gallons per person per day. That's that 90% of 149 GPCD. The bars show the actual GPCD for Glendale. And the year for which the plan is being prepared is the year 2010. You can see there's the 2 years that are the lowest 2 years of the drought, of course. And you can see the decline in gallons per capita per person per day, from before the drought to where the drought had really set in for the 2 years. Before the drought, we were hovering on or around the 2020 target. When the mandatory conservation went into effect, we dropped to 117 and then ultimately 115 gallons per capita per day. Now, we believe that there will be some bounce back from conservation. I think that's just human nature. We don't think that we're going to go all the way back. We're going to have messaging that we didn't have before. In the years before the drought, we weren't really telling people water 3 days a week. The years after the drought, we will be. So we expect that we will see a little bit of a bounce back, and so our plan shows that. That's what we expect. And since the population isn't going to change much in a year, that manifests itself in this chart as a bump up in the GPCD. But we think that that's going to stay steady. So for the next few years, you see that staying at about 200 or 120 GPCD for Glendale. Over time, and the scale of the chart changes after the year 2015, it changes and goes to 5-year increments, and so the decline is not quite the same time scale. We expect that based on population projections, Glendale will get denser. But with density comes lower per capita demand. So we expect that our per capita demand will actually decline over time. The 20 by 2020 Act also has an interim goal of for the year 2015, which is halfway between the 149 and or 142 and 137, and of course we meet that just the same. And you asked the question about some of the assumptions that we made. Those are really captured all in here in terms of population projection and GPCD assumptions that we've made. But we project that Glendale, as it's gotten denser, will actually be more efficient as a whole than what it has been in the past. The second piece of the conservation has to do with best management practices. And best management practices is a term that's used in the water industry, and it reflects practices that were adopted by the California Urban Water Conservation Council, a group that came together voluntarily and said, let's define what is good practice, a good way to be in California. And they asked, back in when the group was formed, they asked all water utilities to sign up if they believed in those conservation methods. And Glendale was one of the original signatories and agreed to the 14 best management practices that were identified at that time. And those were later reorganized and categorized into 5 different areas: utility operations, education, residential, commercial, industrial, institutional conservation approach, and then landscape approach. Those 14 are listed here. And the Urban Water Management Plan, we are required to list those and list our compliance. We comply with all those best management practices. We have programs in place that bring us into compliance with all those. So the public process that we have to follow, and that's prescribed in the Act as well, is we have to produce this document as a draft, and I think that's the draft that you should be familiar with. That draft was made available in the public library. It was made available at the city clerk's office, which were our 2 primary places. We also made it available at our counter. And we posted notices in the news press, the city clerk's office, and on the website as required to let people know that this was available for public review. This was, we had a 30-day public comment period. This was posted on May 2nd. The public comment period ends today. We haven't received any written comments on this plan. I'm not aware of any verbal comments that we received, but the purpose of the public hearing tonight is to receive any other comments that haven't been submitted to date. So the next steps from after tonight's public hearing are to finalize the Urban Water Management Plan by taking into consideration any comments that we receive, take it to City Council, right now scheduled for June 21st, and we have to adopt it by July 1st to meet the law. And then we need to mail it within 30 days after Council adoption. So at this point, I'd like to answer any questions you may have, and then would suggest you turn it over to public comments.
Question. You may have mentioned this, but I may not have heard it. The 20 by 2020, what's the benchmark? Is there a specific year that started?
Each of the 4 methods gives an option to water utilities for what benchmark to use. In some cases, it's a prior period of time, a 10-year period of time. Water utilities have a choice of which 10-year period of time.
So what are we using?
We're using what's called Method 3, which goes by the hydrologic region average, and we're supposed to meet 90% of that. 90%.
Average over what time, though?
It's what's considered acceptable demand in this region. And so the acceptable demand in this region is 149 GPCD. We're supposed to meet 90% of that, which is 137.
And that 149, what is that based on? That's what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, the Department of Water Resources issued that as guidance, and they said that everybody in Region 9, the reasonable use by 2020 would be 149 GPCD.
But I mean, what period of time are they?
It's not based on a period of time.
If you looked at Glendale in 1915, I'm sure the average amount is much less than it is today. So, I mean, I'm just trying to figure out what time period they're looking at.
I believe they're using climate information, and they're saying that region has this lifestyle and has this type of climate, and in that region, the average should be 149 or less. It's not based on historic, is what I'm saying. It's not based on historic information. It's based on sort of a norm of what it should be.
You mean in terms of how it's constructed, how many single-family homes it has, that sort of thing?
Right. And there is, the California norm for indoor use is 55 gallons per person per day. So they look at it and they say, well, if you have, single-family home, it's going to be higher because you irrigate it. But they sort of aggregate that into a guiding number of 149.
How big is the region that they're looking at?
Our region is most of Ventura County and LA County, and I believe it goes down into County. There's another region further south that has a different. I believe there's 10 hydrologic regions.
Thank you.
Okay. No other comment?
I have a...
Okay.
I had a question going back to your projected water supplies. You indicated a decrease in MWD water usage over the period studied, which of course makes sense because your local supplies are going up. And presumably this information was shared with MWD, which no doubt has its own, either an urban water management plan or an analog of it since they're a wholesaler. Are they basing their plans on a reduced consumption on the part of member agencies, City of Glendale, according to the plan that's been submitted?
They are. Metropolitan Water District prepared its urban water management plan early on because it was necessary for member agencies to know what the wholesaler had available in terms of supplies, but they're closely coordinating with all member agencies, and they're looking to get there's numbers going back and forth both ways, and they know what our projected demands are.
And MWD's numbers are also being broadcast, and they're being seen by people who are involved in the Bay Delta negotiations and the Colorado River Basin states and so forth.
Yes.
Thank you. That's all. I just wanted to highlight that for the viewers.
Okay. We have 2 speaker cards. Mr. Gary Cornell, please.
President Chair.
Are we not done with the presentation?
We are.
We are. Okay.
I was finished. Please.
Madam Chair, Commission members, Gary Cornell, Rancho San Rafael. I have to compliment the Assistant General Manager. I read this pretty thoroughly, very thorough and complete review of our water system. This is the first time that I participated in this, and not knowing that you had this 5-year plan. So it was very educational to me. To me, facing the critical issues facing the department now, going through this, and I concur pretty much what's in the report, I think it boils down to the future and our water supply and being able to conserve is recycled water. Now, I'm happy to see the 5 pages that we had in the report regarding recycled water and the 56 members that are using it now. There wasn't any indication of how many are on the waiting line. I know we are since 1998. And one of the reasons due to the municipal code that Peter mentioned that has been revised, that we were a little longer on the waiting list than we normally desire. For those new members that are not familiar with our development up at Rancho, we're just north of the freeway, just a little bit north of the Glendale Community College. We're number 5 on your water users list. We have over 1,500,000 AF that we irrigate. So we are constantly, as I said, we go back to 1980. When I first came up here, when I was president of the Rancho San Rafael Homeowners Association, it came up here and pleaded our case. I know it can't be done overnight. It takes time. Anything does. We've been patient. I talked to Mr. Steiger regarding this after the presentation to the council regarding the new water recycle program. And I'm happy to see we're on that list, even though we're not mentioned on page 57 here, as far as the customers that are waiting on the list here. But to me on the recycled water issue is this. We could save from import of MWD. And I feel, and perhaps you can make a resolution later, Madam Chair, and you don't have to wait for staff to give it to you. I'd like to see by the end of this decade that we go from 35% up to 50% of local domestic water use. And the more we have that we can produce domestic-wise, the less we take from MWD, and the more we have for infrastructure for our department. And second, I'd like to see, as indicated on the report here, more emphasis on recycled water. I think this is the way we have to go to reduce our demands and also on our conservation efforts. And I think we have a good start here. I'd just like to see more develop. I'm happy with the report, a very, very good one, and I commend the staff, and I thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here before you. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Mr. Milano, please.
Commissioner President Chan, members of the GWP Commission, my name is Herbert Molano. I'd like to address the demand side of this plan, if I may, with a couple of points that I want to address. First is that if we're going to address the demand side, the vehicle, in my opinion, to really reach the public is through the most clear and concise information through the utility bill. I have been asking for many years that we should receive information in a way, in a measurement unit that we all understand, gallons. The City of Los Angeles has for many, many years provided that information, and they have a new bill that just came out this past month that even clarifies that usage, the average usage in gallons for that particular household. I've submitted to you, I believe a year and a half ago, a sample bill that I worked quite significantly with my son, who's a designer at Art Center College of Design. We looked carefully as to how do we convey information in a way that allows for action to take place or for the concern. We looked at the fact that there are many individuals who receive a bill who are elderly, cannot see the bill as clearly, maybe the fine print should be enlarged, things of that nature. But the bill should convey information as to what that goal of the individual is. If someone looks at a bill and says you're using 150 gallons a day, and it's clear and effective, they have a number that they could use to then target the more conservation on their part. I would like for you guys, for this commission, to revisit the sample that I submitted to you, because I think it does a lot of things more than just the area of informing. It really addresses the issue of conservation head on. I'd like to also promote a couple of policies that I've seen other cities implement and I have not seen the City of Glendale implement, and that is to actively change the city codes, building codes, to allow for waterless urinals through all commercial buildings, commercial establishments. I pay attention to these things, and I go to Santa Fe Springs, they're using it all over the place. And there are other cities, can't recall them, but they're in Southern California, who actively promote it. I've looked into waterless urinals as well as for multifamily housing as well, smaller units. They're not too expensive, but I've basically tried to calculate what the payback is if I were to have them. They do require a quarterly, every 3 months, to have one of the devices changed, but it's really very low maintenance in order to have substantial increases. Because if you think about it, we're basically wasting 1.6 gallons of water to get rid of basically 6 ounces. So it is, I think it behooves us for us to look at long-term changes, because the changes that you make today will impact the city so many years from now, and we may very well find ourselves with a severe water shortage, very severe in the future. We really don't know. And it is now that you can actually establish those things. I would like to see this commission promote a pilot program promote a building code change, so that at least it could be started to be implemented. Also, other areas that I think could be explored, such as a gray water recapture, especially for buildings that have more than one story, so you can basically bring those and put those back into irrigation. But I also like to suggest a more effective look again at the way recycled water could be used for the power plant cooling. It is my understanding that I forgot the name of the power plant in Burbank. I believe it was using recycled water. I don't know if they have any problems with it, but I believe that it was a substantial savings in terms of potable water, and I believe we use potable water here in Glendale. I also like to suggest that the main recycled water lines that are already extant could be extended just a little bit further to some of the other larger buildings that have already been pre-piped, according to code, for the use of recycled water. So you have all of these buildings throughout Glendale already fully structured to accept recycled water, and they're not using it. And I think that's where our major savings actually can come in. So, in summary, in looking at the water usage, I want to see that the city really aiming towards a much more stringent use and long-term, policies that allows us to be ready if in the future we find ourselves with a severe drought. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Milano. That rate design change suggestion you mentioned that you submitted last year, if you like, you can resubmit it, and we'll make sure that the next time the bill gets redesigned, that we would consider it.
Madam Chair, if there's no other members of the public that are waiting to comment on the plan, we have made notes of the comments that were received. We'll consider if they need to change our plan in any way. If the Commission has any other comments, we'll take them at this time.
Well, I'd like to make a last call right now to all of our public attendees. Last call for speakers, and if I don't hear any, okay, let's go on.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I jumped the gun a little bit. I was going to invite the Commission if you had any other comments or suggestions for the plan itself. If not, we will take what we've heard into consideration, make any changes that might be necessary, and then go on to Council on the 21st.
Great. Thank you.
Do you need a formal motion from this Commission to Council as a recommendation to approve the plan or not?
I don't believe so. What the Commission's function, and you've been very helpful and accommodating, is to have the public hearing, which is required by law.
Mr. Kavunas, that is correct. So the purpose of today's session was to hold the hearing, and then the adoption will take place at City Council.
Right. Since there are no further speakers, the hearing is now closed. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next item, please.
Item number 6, old business.
I don't believe we have any.
No.
Next item.
Item number 7, new business agenda forecast.
Where are we here?
Well, we have the usual updates. The agenda seems pretty full for July. I don't have anything additional to add.
I had a couple of comments. In one of our recent meetings, I believe it was in May, we talked about, or maybe it was April, including a discussion of delays on the items in the strategic plan that have been delayed, an explanation more about that, and just a reminder of that. I think the agreement was that when we next talked about the quarterly update, we would include a discussion of delays. And I presume that when we do talk about the quarterly update, there will be a discussion on the status of reformulation of the strategic plan. let's see, I think we had also an item on the restructuring of water usage in the state water supply, but I believe Mr. Kavunas' presentation took care of that today. Thank you very much for that. That's all I have.
I do want to note that our normal first Monday falls on July 4th next month, and it's a holiday, and so our meeting is going to be on July 11th. Anything else? No? Okay. Next item.
Adjournment, item number 8.
Have a motion?
I'll make a motion that we adjourn.
Second.
All say aye.
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 Okay. This meeting's over. Thanks.